Line. Story idea by Allen Di Benedetto. Elias Vance had known for 11 days. He had tested it on a stray dog with a broken hip behind the Sunoco, on his landlord's shingles, on his own chipped tooth, which had knit itself whole in his mouth like something rewinding. He had told no one. He had sat with it the way a man sits with a winning lottery ticket. He has not yet decided is real, turning it over, waiting for the part where it stopped being true. On the 12th day he drove to St. Damian's Regional, because it was the nearest hospital and because he had run out of reasons not to. He told himself he would do it quietly. One room, one patient, see what happened. He did not know. Walking in through the automatic doors at 6:52 a.m. With the night shift still dragging its feet toward the parking garage, that quietly was never going to be a real option. Nothing about a hospital is built to keep a secret. It is built, floor to floor, to move information as fast as it can be moved. Labs to charts, charts to phones, phones to hallways. He was about to become the fastest moving information St. Damian's had ever processed. The first one was easy. Room 214. A boy named Caleb, 9 years old, 3 days into a fever that wouldn't break. Mother asleep sideways in the vinyl chair with her mouth open. Elias put his hand on the boy's forehead the way you would check for a temperature. Nothing stranger than that, and felt the thing in his palm do what it did. A kind of draining away, heat and wrongness pulled out through his own arm, like water finding a lower place to be. Caleb's eyes opened. He looked less like a sick child, and more like a child waking up on a Saturday. "You feel different?" Elias asked. "I feel hungry," Caleb said, which was correct, which was the tell. The mother didn't wake up. Elias left before she did. He told himself this was mercy, not cowardice, though he suspected by lunchtime he wouldn't be able to tell the two apart anymore. Nurse Priya, Adji clocked the boy's chart update at 7:40 during rounds and stood in the doorway, a full 10 seconds too long. She had 11 years in pediatrics. She knew a fever curve when she saw one, and this wasn't a curve. It was a cliff. And clean workup, no explanation. The kind of resolution she had only ever seen described in malpractice depositions as unexpected and unexplained. She thought coincidence. She thought underneath that, in a much quieter voice, she didn't examine closely. "I should tell someone." She told no one. Not yet. She had 4 more rooms before her break, and a husband who had been texting her about the mortgage since 6 a.m. And there is a kind of tired that makes you set strange things aside so you can deal with normal things first. She made a note to ask the attending later. The note stayed in her head. The head that morning had too many other things in it. By 9:15, Elias had done 4 more rooms. He had stopped introducing himself. He had found a rhythm, in hand on skin, the pull out, before the patient fully understood what had happened to them. He liked, in a way he was ashamed of, that it felt like the dog behind the Sunoco. Uncomplicated. A closed loop. Nobody had to know his name for it to work. The 5th room broke the rhythm. An elderly man, Frank Delacroix. 3 weeks post-stroke. Right side gone soft and unresponsive. The kind of prognosis families are gently taught to grieve in advance. Elias put his hand on the old man's shoulder and felt something enormous move. Something with real resistance to it. Like pulling a truck out of mud instead of a pebble out of a shoe. Frank's right hand closed, opened, closed again, on purpose this time. His daughter, Renata, had stepped out for coffee 4 minutes earlier. She would spend the rest of her life doing the math on those 4 minutes, on what she had missed, on what she would have done differently if she had been standing there, instead of in line at the Aubon Pain, arguing internally about whether to get the blueberry muffin. When she came back and saw her father's hand moving, she did not think for miracle. My, she thought, first, purely and instantly. This was happening to her father. This belonged to her family. She would spend 9 hours holding on to that thought like a rope, and it would be of everyone's, the smallest and most forgivable of the selfishnesses that built the day. And it would still be a brick in the wall. She found Elias in the hallway outside room 219 and grabbed his wrist and said, "What did you just do?" And Elias, who had 11 days of practice at this exact conversation and no good answers in it, said the truth. because he was tired of the alternative. I healed him. Word does not spread in a hospital. It detonates. By 10 o'clock, 4 rooms knew. By 10:20, not because anyone screamed it down the hallway, nothing so crude, but because a nurse mentioned it to another nurse at the med cart. And a resident overheard and told an attending as a joke, half believing it, and the attending, who did not believe it, went to check Frank Delacroix's chart out of professional irritation, and came back not saying anything at all, which was somehow louder than if she had. By 10:45, there were people in the hallway who were not staff and not patients. Family members, a woman with a laminated badge from the front desk, who had left her post to come look, a man in a Carhartt jacket who had been in the waiting room 3 hours for a totally unrelated appointment, and had simply followed the current of bodies, because the current of bodies was the most interesting thing happening. Elias stood at the nurse's station with his hands, without meaning to, tucked under his armpits, like a boy hiding something he had been caught holding. I cannot do everyone, he said, to nobody in particular, to everybody. I need to eat something. I need to sit down for a second. Nobody heard the second half of that sentence. Everybody heard the first half and processed it as, Find. He can do everyone, eventually, if we wait our turn. This was the last moment at which the day could have gone a different way. Later, 3 separate people would tell 3 separate versions of what should have happened next. A manager should have been called. Security should have set up a line. Someone should have made an announcement over the PA that this would be handled fairly, in order that everyone would get their chance. All of these people were correct about what should have happened. None of them did it, because doing it required someone to believe, in that exact minute, that there would be a later minute in which it still mattered, and nobody in the hallway believed in later minutes anymore. They believed in now. Deshawn Okafor, hospital security, 6 years on the job, had seen fights break out over parking spots and vending machines. And once, memorably, over whether a man's dying father could have visitors past hours. He knew crowds. He knew the difference between a crowd that is waiting and a crowd that has started, without knowing it yet, to compete. At 11:05, he clocked the difference. People were still standing in something that resembled a line, but they were standing in it the way people stand in line for concert tickets that might sell out, with their bodies angled slightly forward, weight on the balls of their feet, eyes not on each other but on the door. Elias had disappeared behind to catch his breath. Deshawn had a radio. He had a protocol for this. Technically, filed somewhere under fruity crowd control. Non-violent. Medical emergency adjacent. A protocol, written by someone who had never imagined this specific situation, and so had written something too general to be useful. He called it in anyway. I need another body up here. Maybe 2. He didn't have the words yet, and even if he had, he suspected dispatch wouldn't believe him, and every minute he spent trying to make them believe him was a minute he wasn't watching the door. Inside a supply closet that had become, without anyone officially deciding so, Elias' command post, he sat on an upturned bucket of surgical scrub and put his head in his hands. You don't have to do this, said Priya, who had followed him in, who was the only person in the building who had thought to ask him a question that wasn't "I'm next." I know, Elias said, so don't. There is a 9-year-old boy 2 floors up who was dying yesterday and isn't today, Elias said. There is an old man who couldn't move his hand. I don't know how to stop knowing that and go home. Priya didn't have an answer for that, because it was the correct answer, and correct answers about obligation are the ones that get people killed. And she knew that too. Some animal part of her did, even as she nodded like it made sense. She would think about this later, in the quietest and worst way a person thinks about things. For years. Then let me organize it, she said. Let me get a list. Names. One at a time. Worst cases first. You do what you can, when you can, and we control the door. It was a good plan. It was, on paper, the entire solution. The tragedy of what happened next is not that nobody thought of the right answer. Priya thought of it at 11:20 in a supply closet, fully formed. Workable. The tragedy is that a plan is only as strong as the number of people willing to wait for their place in it. And by 11:20 that number, out in the hallway, had already dropped below the number required. The hallway outside room 219, no longer resembled a hallway. It resembled a shape a hallway makes when 140 people try to occupy the space built for 30. Marisol Herrera, 7 months pregnant, had come for a routine ultrasound and stayed because her sister had texted her Sifty. There's a guy on 2 who's healing people. No joke. Come now. Sifoy. And now she stood pressed between a vending machine and a man's shoulder blade, telling herself she'd leave if it got tighter, and not leaving, because leaving meant giving up her spot. And her spot, 4 bodies back from the supply closet door, felt at that moment like the most valuable thing she owned. Tom Reyes, 61, chest pain that had brought him in that morning, and was, if he was honest with himself, probably just heartburn, had heard the word Fidi Hilsa, and thought about his knees, about the surgery he couldn't afford, and had gotten up from his gurney and walked, with pole and all, because a man who might disappear at any moment was worth more to him right now than a diagnosis that could wait. A woman named Connie, no relation to any patient in the building, had seen a post on her neighborhood app 40 minutes earlier. Miracle healer at St. Damian's. My cousin works there. Get here if you can walk. She had brought her father, who had a bad hip, and had had it for 11 years and could, medically speaking, have waited another 11. She did not want to wait another 11. Nobody in that hallway, if you had stopped them and asked, would have said out loud, I don't believe there will be enough of him to go around. But they were all moving like people who believed exactly that. Deshawn's 2 extra bodies arrived at 11:40. It was already too many people too late. We need to clear this hallway, he said to the crowd, over the crowd, into the crowd. And the crowd heard him the way a river hears a man standing in it asking it to stop. Somewhere in the press, someone said, he is coming out. And it was not true, not yet. Elias was still in the closet with Priya, arguing about a list. Nobody outside that door had agreed to respect. But it did not matter that it was not true. It moved through the hallway, the way the boy's fever had moved out through Elias' arm that morning. Fast and downhill, and impossible to call back once it started. The crowd surged toward the door. Elias heard it before he understood it. A sound like weather, like something large changing state. Priya heard it too and put her hand flat against the door as if her 130 pounds were an argument the door could win. Don't open it, she said. He didn't open it. It didn't matter. The door was a door, hollow core, hospital grade, built to keep out draft and noise. Not 140 people who had each individually decided, alone in their own head, that this was the only chance they were going to get. It came off the frame at 11:52. What happened in the next 4 minutes does not resolve, afterward, into a story anyone can tell straight through. Every account breaks in the same place and starts again from a slightly different angle. The way Whitfield's crowds always do, each person narrating the version where their own hands were the least guilty. Marisol would say she was pushed from behind and never chose to move forward at all, which was true, and also true that she did not, in the 4 minutes available, try very hard to move back. Tom would say he only wanted to touch the man's sleeve, just once, just enough, and he did reach the sleeve. He got that much. His hand closed on fabric for perhaps a second and a half, before the weight behind him made his own body a wall pressing forward into other bodies. Connie would say, for the rest of her life, that she never touched him at all. And this was probably true, and it changed nothing, because 140 people do not need all of them to touch a thing in order for the thing to be crushed by their number. Priya, knocked sideways in the collapse of the closet's narrow footprint, spent the 4 minutes screaming a sentence that nobody heard as words. Only a sound, one more sound inside a hallway that had stopped being able to distinguish sound from sound. Deshawn got 2 arms around one body, then a second, hauling backward with everything he had, and made, in real terms, no measurable difference at all. He would carry the 2-arm memory of that for a long time, the specific useless feeling of holding on to something that was already gone underneath, 130 other things holding on to it too. Elias Vance, who had spent 11 days deciding alone, quietly, in a way that hurt no one, that he wanted to do some good with the strange thing that had happened to him, was on the floor by 11:54. He put a hand up, at some point, It isn't clear whose skin it landed on, if any. And whoever it landed on did not get better, because there was no version of this that worked one at a time anymore. There was only weight, and more weight arriving behind the weight that was already there. People climbing without meaning to climb, needing without meaning to need more than the person beside them, until need stopped being able to tell itself apart from anything else. By noon, the hallway had gone quiet in the specific, terrible way a loud thing goes quiet, not resolved, just exhausted. Frank Delacroix, 2 rooms down, moved his right hand, opened it, closed it, watching his own fingers with the private wonder of a man who has been given something back that he had been taught to grieve. He did not know, would not know for another hour, what the hallway outside had cost. His daughter Renata sat beside him holding the working hand in both of hers. And for that hour, that specific hour, it must have felt like the whole story had a happy ending. Hers, at least, small and complete and separate from anything else in the building. Caleb, 9 years old, ate a cup of hospital jello and asked his mother, who had finally woken up, whether he could go to school tomorrow. Neither of them, not the boy, not the old man, not the daughter holding his hand, was ever able to explain to anyone what had actually happened downstairs. Because neither of them had been there, and by the time they heard, the story had already started to harden into the shape it would keep. A tragedy, a terrible accident, nobody could have predicted, rather than what it actually was, which was 140 individually reasonable decisions, made one at a time, by people who each believed, in the privacy of their own skull, that if they didn't take their piece right now, there would be nothing left for them by the time it was their turn. They were wrong about that. There would have been enough. There was always going to be enough. Deshawn Okafor gave his statement 3 times that week, to 3 different people, and each time he found himself circling back to the same detail, the one that never made it into any official report, because it wasn't the kind of detail reports are built to hold. At 11:15, 17 minutes before the door came off its hinges, he had walked the length of that hallway, and it had still, technically, not orderly, not calm, but a line. A shape that said 40, we are waiting for our turn. He had thought, at 11:15, that it might hold. He never could explain what changed in those 17 minutes. Nothing happened. No announcement. No provocation. No single moment he could point to and say, there, that was when it broke. It simply stopped being a line the way ice stops being ice. Not from one blow, but from 100 small ones. None of them decisive. All of them adding up. It had rules until it didn't need them anymore. He told the third interviewer, a woman from risk management with a legal pad and a tired patient face. And the second it stopped needing them, it stopped being a line at all. It was just people, all of them wanting the same thing. All of them sure there wasn't enough of it to go around. She wrote that down. She did not ask him what he meant, because she understood it, the way everyone in the building understood it by the end of that day, the way it took the rest of the city considerably longer to understand, if it ever fully did. There is almost always enough. What there had never been enough of, in that hallway, on that particular Tuesday, was the 15 minutes of collective patience it would have taken for everyone to get what they came for. The line had been built for exactly the right number of people. It broke the moment those people decided, together and separately, and all at once, that they could not afford to trust it.